There's almost a bit of a rise of the mid-tier game. There's a sort of an emergence of games that are really good, but aren't the most expensive games in the world to make. Is anybody going to try and buy us? I don't know. That's up to them. We would not be easy to buy because it would have to be something more than money.
Hello and welcome to the Game Business Show with me, Christopher Dring. One of the UK's longest running game studios is Rebellion, which has been going for, I think, about 32 years now and is best known for games such as Sniper Elite, Alien vs. Predator, Zombie Army Trilogy, and has recently launched its most played game ever in the post-apocalyptic action game Atomfall, which found a really big audience on Game Pass. To chat about that, making games in the UK and just generally the state of things, we have with us the CEO of Rebellion, Jason Kingsley. Hello, Jason. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you very much. Yeah, CEO, creative director and co-founder is what I normally put on business cards that I no longer get printed. So,
Dude, I had business cards printed recently for the launch of the game business because I felt like I needed to hand them out. Yeah. But I genuinely can't remember the last time I did business cards. It's
No, well, I had a stack of unused ones and I realised I had a fax number on there and I thought, good grief. When's the last time I've ever received or sent a fax? And it must be 20 years ago, which is weird because you think when technology comes into your life, it's just a thing and then it goes out again. And if you don't make a mental note of it, I mean, I'm supposed to start talking about Blackberries next.
Yeah, your pager number is going to be on there or your... This is the first one I hadn't had an address on it. I think that was certainly different. Well, welcome to the show. Last time we spoke, we were talking about your upcoming launch of Atomfall and all the things you were doing. It's now been out there. It's launched it at the end of March. Was it everything you hoped for? Or how would you review the game's debut?
I mean, super pleased. It's done incredibly well. I don't think as a games maker, games are ever actually finished. You could always have found, if you could find a bit more time and a bit more energy to sort of do a bit more on every game. I think anybody that makes a game will go, it's not, I could have done that and that. But the main thing is to get the game out there, get people's feedback and get people looking at it. Now it's always a bit nerve wracking when you launch a new IP. Everybody talks about new IPs and everybody really seems to want them, but it's much harder to convince people to buy something that's a new IP. So you're always a bit nervous about launching something like that. I knew we had a good game because I played it a lot and various people had test played it and done test reviews and things like that. So we thought we had a good game, but you never quite know whether it's going to be okay or really good or absolutely fantastic. And it's been absolutely fantastic, which is a pleasant surprise in today's geopolitical climate, to be honest.
Oh, right. Why do you think that?
Well, there's so much bad news out there, isn't there, quite frankly, about the games industry in general, but about the wider geopolitics, trade wars and all that kind of stuff. So the news is a bit grim, but when you can boil it down to something that actually is positive and good, like releasing a game took a lot of people, a lot of hard work, and people appreciate it and enjoy playing it, and it makes it profitable, then, it's a nice little sort of bright spark in an otherwise potentially grim world.
I'll say this, I think when we spoke last time, it was, there was Star Wars Outlaws hadn't done very well and Dragon Age hadn't done very well, and it felt like a really tough time. Actually, this year, we've just had that Expedition 33, which is another Game Pass title, which has done very well. Oblivion's done very well. Assassin's Creed did very well. Monster Hunter did very well. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 did very well. You've done very well. And actually, I know that there's still a lot of negativity out there. It's probably almost as much, if not more, than there has been in the past. But there are some bright spots, and it sounds like your game was one of them.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's some really, really good and really successful games. I think what's interesting is that there's almost a bit of a rise of the mid-tier game. There's a sort of a little bit of an emergence of games that are really good, but aren't the most expensive games in the world to make. And I think that gives us hope for the long-term creativity of the games industry in a big way.
Obviously, I think what helps new IP, at least certainly helped Expedition 33, is being Game Pass. How was that experience for you? It looks like the numbers heavily skewed towards Xbox as a result.
Yeah, a number of players obviously heavily skewed towards an environment where people can test a new game. So free at the point of purchase. I mean, game subscription services aren't free, but they kind of feel like they're free in some ways, which is fine. So there's less risk to try multiple games. I mean, I suppose you get refunds if you go on Steam, for example, and quite frankly, consumer rights mean you can buy a game and take it back to the shop. You always could do, but it's a load of hassle. Game Pass has been great, mostly, I think, because we got a lot of exposure for a new brand or for a new idea. Mm-hmm. And in particular, I'd note the sort of engagement that Microsoft gave us. It was brilliant. You know, they really helped spread the word, which kind of makes sense because they want to promote their game service subscription. Mm-hmm. But they've been remarkably easy to work with, quite demanding actually sometimes. And so it's always it's quite, when things are going well, people need more stuff to support it. So you need more screenshots, you need more video presentations, and that actually kind of escalates. The more successful you're being, the more people want to show, the more new stuff you've got to generate. So there's a certain stress point, which is we're creating a lot of things. We coped, and it's good. It's a good stress. It's like being told to run faster by somebody. Yeah. They've been absolutely great. They've been really good partners to work with. They've been a massive company, but lots of really, enthusiastic games playing individuals to work with, which is nice. It's a breath of fresh air.
One of the things I know about Game Pass is that people are willing to try stuff. They're willing to shop around, jump around between games, things that they might not normally consider. They give that a go. We can see that in the data. But that obviously creates a challenge in that they're also quite easy to disappear. They're quite easy to jump out and they go, well, that wasn't for me. I'll play something else, or there's always something else is there. I'll go play that because that excites me more. Were you mindful of that at all with Atomfall, or did you not think about that potential?
You can worry about it a little bit in the abstract, but basically, I don't think any game that has ever been made will be liked by everybody.
No.
Everybody's got different tastes. Everybody's individual. Some games are liked by most of the people that play it, but somebody will just not resonate with the game you're making. And that's fine. That's how it works. Same with art, same with movies, same with TV shows, books. Any creative endeavor will get to a subset of the audience.
Yeah.
And a subset of that audience will like it. Hopefully a big group, and a small group won't like it and will want a refund. So the challenge is getting to the biggest group possible. Yeah, the challenge, I think, in today's crowded media space, because we're all short of time. There's only so many hours we can spend watching streaming video or YouTube or reading books or going out for walks. We all got limited time. So what we're actually competing about is quality of product, obviously, but awareness. You can make the best game in the world, but if nobody's ever heard of it, you never release it, nobody's ever going to play it.
Yeah.
And arguably, you could look at the other end of that equation, which is there are some games which are not particularly sophisticated that have gone to incredibly wide audiences. Some games in the mobile space, for example, are not technically difficult to make, but have gone to a very, very wide kind of a wide casual audience, and hundreds of millions of people play them. So somewhere on that curve, you've got to find your space if you're trying to make a more traditional kind of console title.
And that's harder to do when the media space is so fractured and audiences are not, the days when we all watched the same 4 TV channels.
Yeah.
Read the same newspapers and all that kind of stuff.
Thursday evening, what was it? Top of the Pops. Was it Tomorrow's World, Top of the Pops? Can't remember. Came back from school and Thursday evening on the telly was the evening. It's almost the start of the weekend, and everybody shared that. So Friday, you'd be talking about what was on Top of the Pops. But that's all gone now. That whole landscape has shifted entirely.
When I was talking about the Game Pass, the fact that people might bounce off it, what I was sort of referring to is, are you mindful of the fact that, hang on, we need to make sure we have all the good stuff in the first hour, and so that people like it, they'll see it straight away.
Yeah, I mean, you don't put all your good stuff. You obviously are very mindful of people's first impressions of the game. The beginning of a game has got to hook people, like the beginning of a video you make, like the beginning of an article you write. If you don't tell people, I mean, isn't there a phrase, burying the lead?
Yeah.
In journalism, you've got to tell people a reason to keep reading. You've got to do the same when making a game or doing a YouTube video, because people can swipe away. They do it all the time. So very mindful of that. But you've also got to introduce the concepts of the game. You've got to intrigue. And you've got to not challenge too much either, because you don't want people dying straight away, because then they might go, oh, this game's too difficult. And there is still very, very difficult games in the world, but you also want to try and get people into your game before you kill them straight away.
Indeed. Well, you made a very British game in Atomfall. It's set, I think, in the Lake District, which is, I think, especially unique. And I love the stats you put out. 3.7 million kills using the cricket bat, or 4 million pasties, and 300,000 cups of tea have been consumed. You don't get much more British than cricket, pasties, and tea. So why was that important to you? Why was it important that you made such a quintessential local game, I guess?
Well, I've always been champion for the British industry. And I set up Tiger, a games industry development representative body, at the time when there was only one trade body that was but that was the Publishers Association. And you couldn't join it if you were a games developer, because we were just the people that made games. They were the people that published them. That was back in the bad old days, I suppose, of publishing slots in consoles and permissions and all that kind of thing. That's all gone away again. So it'll be written about in history books. But it was an interesting time to be trying to make games. Technology was very different. Expectations were different. But I've always felt that the British culture is slightly underrepresented in games. There's lots of Americanism, and even the science fiction worlds are often quite Americanized. They're quite big, lots of heavy gunfire in it, and sort of less subtlety perhaps, and less ironic comedy. I quite like my sort of slightly self-parodying aspects of British culture. We're making fun of our own culture, like cricket bats and pasties and cups of tea, knowingly. And that's part of our culture, is that sort of self-reference, self-deprecation. I also thought the Lake District's a beautiful place and should be explored. But I was very keen, it was my idea in the first place. I wanted to juxtapose the beautiful countryside with the sort of apocalyptic weirdness. I imagined walking down a beautiful landscape, thinking, this is lovely, and then seeing a crashed helicopter. And the juxtaposition of the two will kind of make you go, that's weird. That's really weird, and slightly unsettle you. And I've always been interested in the types of science fiction that ask questions about society. I really like going into cities via railways, because you go into that railway, you look out of the window, you see the sort of industrial hinterland that's not meant to be seen. You've got piles of things, and you've got rubbish, and you've got the backs of people's houses. And I find that really interesting, because it's not the facade, it's the back end of things. And it's sort of not designed to be looked at, and therefore more honest in some ways.
Wow. I definitely think that came across.
It's a bit philosophical there, sorry.
No, well, that's the creative element of what it is you're trying to do. And I think that's one of the reasons why it resonated, certainly before its release, was because it looked different and it had a style and a uniqueness to it, which you need to have in today's games market, really, in order to find an audience.
I think so. There's a little test we sometimes do internally, which is, if we take a screenshot, can you guess which game the screenshot's from without knowing? There are an awful lot of games that fail that test. You see yet another sort of brightly coloured science fiction-y shooter. If you didn't know it was a screenshot from game X because you made it, could you guess that it was? Or does it blend into every other shiny future science fiction game? And so the answer is sometimes yes, and the answer is sometimes no for some games. Oblivion, the recent remake, you can tell from a screenshot that's Oblivion. Expedition 33, I think you can pretty much tell what that game is from a screenshot. So you've got to have a little bit of difference. Doesn't mean a game needs to be completely stylized or weird, but is there something that makes that game look a bit different than all the other games?
Yeah, no, I think that's certainly true of Atomfall. I'll go back to your comment about the UK, because obviously you are a keen supporter of the UK development scene. You did, help out set up Tiger. I'm interested to know your take on how things are in the UK at the moment, because so many of the big studios now seem to be under US or Chinese ownership. How are you feeling about the development scene in Britain at the minute?
Well, very, very mixed. I would say there are some high spots and there are some low spots. A lot of people losing their jobs, which is awful. Not through their fault, which is even worse. Somebody can just be doing a job and getting on with making good games, and suddenly they lose their job because somebody external has decided to change the structure. That's horrible. If you're failing, then understandably, you get the consequences of that. But if it's not your fault, that's harsh. But there are bright spots. There's a lot of indie stuff starting up as well. So when you get these collapses, you do get indie studios starting up and trying. And it's never been easier to actually get a game to the market than now. Mm-hmm. There's very little barriers to actually getting a game in front of an audience. And social media means that you can also communicate with people. You can talk to influencers relatively free. If your game's good enough, people will talk about it on YouTube videos or on various of the different social channels. So you can grab attention, but there's an awful lot out there. Yeah. So the other side of that is it's really hard to stand above the crowd and get noticed. And so it's easier than ever to make a game, but it's probably harder than ever to make that game successful.
Yeah, and get that funding in the first place, I guess.
Yeah,
as well can be quite tricky.
You don't necessarily need funding either, though. You can, one person can make a game these days and make it successful. There are various games that have been successful. Actually, you look into it and there's an awful lot of outsourcing gone on and, other people have helped out. But again, there are libraries of content you can buy.
Yeah.
You can go to the various of the libraries and you can say, I want to license that set of trees for my game set in a wood. And yeah, they're the same trees that other people will be using, but if you light them differently and arrange them differently, people might not notice. And it's relatively inexpensive. So yeah, I would say my assessment would be mixed.
Yeah. Oddly, you've made me think of Undisputed, the boxing game came out last year, which obviously that was like 3 guys in a room to begin with. And then of course they got money, but they built something first and probably with next to nothing. Really?
Yes. Yeah. You always have to look behind the hype a bit. So sometimes, as we're all in the industry, you sort of know things, and people claim that it was done by one person. You go, yeah, one person, very talented, well done, but lots of outsourcers and the animation was done by a separate team in a different part of the world. It's brilliant. They did a really good job. And the engine is done by somebody else. And you add that all up and you're talking about well over 150 to 200 people to make the game.
Yeah.
But the core team is whatever, is relatively small.
Yeah. Well, it seems to be where a lot of things are heading anyway. Well, we talked about this earlier, that the market is quite inconsistent at the moment. For every surprise hit, we're getting a shock disappointment. And that's particularly the case in 2024. How is that affecting you at Rebellion in terms of or is it affecting you in terms of what you're doing and how you're thinking?
Not really, no, because the way we try to make games is Chris and I come up with the ideas. We try to make games that we want to play. We don't do much in the way of market research or try to analyze gameplay trends and jump on the back of them or any of that kind of stuff. But partly because I just don't have the appetite for making creative decisions like that. And partly because we set up Rebellion back in the day because we wanted to make games, and that's what we want to keep doing. We want to keep making games and entertaining people. So we don't really follow trends if we can avoid it. We try not to follow trends. What we try to do is come up with an idea that we think resonates, and perhaps when we talk about the idea, everybody in the room sits forward and goes, yeah, that's an interesting idea. And that, generally speaking, translates to a successful game because it means other people will think it's an interesting idea. And then we very carefully control budgets. Very carefully control them, because you can spend an awful lot of money on a game, as we know. You can spend hundreds of millions, literally. Some people are talking about, isn't GTA, the next GTA, rumored to be up in the billion or something?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. Something mad. It's like, holy moly, how do you spend that much money? Well, it'll be a great game and it'll sell really well, but that's a lot of responsibility. Our games are not anywhere near the scale of investment of an Ubisoft game, for example. They just don't have so many people working on them. And you could argue they are not nearly as big either.
No.
For that reason. We try to keep budgets at a sensible level so that we are pretty confident we can sell enough to make the money back and then hopefully make a profit at the end of the day, which is, generally speaking, what we've managed to do for our whole career.
Yeah. Going back to core principles, I think a lot of companies are having to do that right now, which is look at your margins, budget responsibly, try and make a game that's focused, you know who your audience is, whether that's a new IP or an established one. And sort of, I think there's a level of clarity about the video games business at the moment in terms of that approach to making games. You don't necessarily spend $500 million on a video game that you don't really, where the audience is really wide and you're having to throw everything in the kitchen sink at a 100-hour experience. At least it'll still work for some games. It'll work for GTA, it'll work for Assassin's Creed, it'll work for games of a certain scale. But for a lot of people, it's probably not the best approach at the moment.
Well, it's impossible. If you don't have the money, you literally can't do that. So you've got to do it differently. And I'm not saying we don't spend significant amounts of money. We do. Our budgets are many millions of pounds, and that's quite a big sum of money, quite frankly. It pales into insignificance compared to the top end of games, but also we're spending a ton more than a lot of indie studios.
Yeah.
So we sort of sit in this, some people call it this comfortable middle ground, and other people call it an uncomfortable middle ground.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. It seems to work for us, though.
Live service games are lucrative but challenging at the moment. And I know that you were working on one, you had been working on with Tencent, which you're not doing anymore. Is that a space you're still interested in, or is that an example of not doing what everyone else is doing?
That was a bit of a one-off. We don't do work for hire. We don't work for other people.
Yeah.
But Tencent were very keen to learn about how Tencent worked, and Tencent were very keen to learn how we worked. And I think there was a mutual interest in learning from each other. At the end, I think we walked away because we felt the market had shifted entirely.
Yeah.
We still have great relationships with them. It was one of those business opportunities that didn't get to the ultimate end that we were hoping for. So yeah, it was interesting. And Tencent are a really good company. They're a really interesting company. They're huge though. So it depends who you're talking to. It was like like an elephant that's as big as the horizon. You're not quite sure which bit of the elephant you're actually talking to, but there's a lot of very talented people there. Cultural differences, of course, working with the Chinese is always a learning experience. That's always wonderful. I like learning about new cultures and different ways of communicating. Languages were different. And of course, in China, they have many different languages, and not just Chinese. They got lots of different types of Chinese. And that was interesting for them also to listen to our different accents, because we've got people up in the north of England and, up in Runcorn and down south. And some of those accents are easier for some people to understand when people are speaking English. And that was quite funny because we were also working on Atomfall at the time, and we were using a lot of regional actors, using their genuine regional accents to show some of the characters. Because I was very keen. I didn't want to just have Cumberland accents. I wanted a whole bunch of different regional accents. And I actually said to the team, I don't want any southern accents if we can avoid it. There'll be a few in there. There need to be because of the story. I don't want any cheeky cockneys if we can avoid it again, maybe one or two, but I'm not having the whole cheeky cockney thing. Can we have Scottish accents, Welsh accents, Northern Welsh accents, Liverpudlian accents, accents from the Black Country, from Cornwall, all parts of it, all interesting areas. Yeah. And that's what they did. And we've got some brilliant actors. What's interesting in that is that a lot of voice actors, professional voice actors, have a professional voice that is sort of more or less the way I speak in some ways, where it's sort of an RP, I guess you could call it that. But when you ask them, they're slightly less comfortable acting in their actual accent, their kind of family accent. We said, look, how would you speak to your mum and dad? How do you speak to your children? How do you speak to your neighbours? Can we use that, please? And if you've got any ideas about slang phrases, we want to know what they are. They're the regional insults. We've got a lot of regional insults in the game, which is cool.
Yeah, and the Chinese was a bit lost in that, were they?
Well, yes. Quite frankly, I think a lot of our North American viewers were quite lost by some of those too.
So you shifted away from live service after that, but I think you've got a VR game out in May. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we keep our hand in VR. I think it's an interesting space.
Yeah.
It actually, things sell quite well, but it's sort of a bit under the radar.
Yeah.
In a sort of weird way.
I was going to say, is it a viable space for you?
Yeah, it is. It's not as big as the mainstream, but it is still very, very good. And you look at the numbers, you look at the data going, that's actually really good. Why are we not doing more of these?
I think it's Zombie Army VR, May 22nd. I think it's out according to the information that's just been provided to me. Well, you've got these successful brands that you've been developing your own IP. But you've also got beyond that, beyond your games, you've got your media production stuff that you do. You've got your I'm about to say comic publishing division, but it's not just comics, it's novels and all sorts of things that you've got going.
Comics and books and board games, tabletop board games, Rebellion Unplugged,
And it seems to be overall broadly very stable business. But how do you, and the answer might be, we're not interested in this, but how do you take that next step up? Are you looking for that? Are you looking for that next stage? Are you looking for partners to sort of help you go to the next level? Or are you kind of comfortable where you are?
The default is to keep doing what we do because we enjoy it and it's successful. So Chris and I always say, let's have a long conversation with somebody, and if they want to buy us an expensive meal at a restaurant, we'll chat to them about it somewhere nice. I don't know. I think we're quite protective of the success of what we've got. We don't gamble wildly on one roll of the dice. I want to be able to give people jobs as long as they want a job with me. I want to pay them well, and I want them to feel stable, so that, because I know we've got a lot of responsibility to people that work for us. The people that work for us, broadly speaking, getting older, and they start to have families, and those families have ties that bind them. And after you start to have as a boss of a company, I think you should feel you have responsibility towards people that you employ, and arguably the people that play your games as well. This is why we try and make games that are accessible. And by accessible, I don't mean people necessarily who are disabled. I mean people that have less time or aren't so good at playing games as they used to be, or just don't want to commit to spending 100 hours playing this game. They just want to enjoy themselves in those kind of half-hour gameplay sessions they've got when their young kids have finally gone to sleep and they're so knackered they know they're going to go to sleep, but they still want to play a game for half an hour. So accessibility to me is accessibility in the broadest sense of it. So engaging with other partners. Yeah, well, we've got a lot of people that like talking to us from in the industry and outside the industry. And, we'll take calls and we'll see. There might be an opportunity that comes along that we can go, yeah, that's something that makes sense. We'll go along in that direction. Or it might be, no, it's not for us. We're not looking at that at the moment. There are a number of acquisitions at the moment that might be interesting for us. We're just looking at the market, what we think is sensible. So we're considering a number of options there, but looking at intellectual property, we're looking at more movie productions. We're looking at, there's a lot more games, tabletop gaming. I've got a book coming out, a fictional book called Lord of Blackthorn. It's the one behind me. That's the mock-up cover.
Oh.
It's coming out later this year, which is quite exciting. It's a fantasy adventure book I've written, and it's being published by Rebellion. So we keep trying lots of different things. So yes, there could be. Is anybody going to try and buy us? I don't know. That's up to them. We would not be easy to buy because it would have to be something more than money. It would have to feel like it was getting involved in a bigger entity somehow. And then I look at how some big companies are run and think, yeah, I think I could run them better than they're being run at the moment. Then maybe I'm completely wrong. So,
it's a different, well, there's an element. I've obviously gone from a corporation to being independent, and it's certainly I don't think I'd go back. And
there are. I mean, just to interview you a little bit, that's interesting, because when you're working in a big corporate structure, you have certain things that work in a certain way. Yeah. And when you go freelance, it shifts and changes, and you suddenly realize what you're missing and what you're gaining. And it's sometimes a bit of a tricky balance. Is that what you found?
Yeah, well, actually, I was, there were definitely advantages to being part of a corporation. You're looked after, you know what you've got. There's a stability there. You're surrounded by people. There's a lot more meetings. But it can be frustrating. I mean, I'm quite fortunate because I've come out into a world and I've immediately got a backer. So there was an element of, I'm not sitting there worrying where my next, how am I going to be able to maintain the financial situation that I was a year ago. I've immediately had that sorted from the start. So I've got this sort of quite fortunate position where I'm independent, but also funded for a few years.
Very good. That's very sensible.
Yeah, it's very fortunate. So I don't know if I can speak for everyone that's in this position, but I certainly enjoying making my own decisions and working to schedules that I set and doing things that I think is important. And it's not that there's anything corporations do anything wrong, but they've got different pressures, right? And they're often bigger organizations that have got different priorities. Those priorities shift and change. You talked about some of the changes in the games industry where, it's no fault of people's own. It's just that the company at the top has changed its strategy. And it's almost nobody's fault. It's sort of, that's just the reality of the situation you're in. You can find yourself out in the cold or put in a corner, or the things you were hoping were happening aren't going to happen because something else is on fire and needs looking after, or something else that's exciting and they're going to invest in that area instead. And it's nice to be able to be a bit more in control of what you're doing. And I guess, I'm speaking to you, you must know that.
And so I'm basically exactly the same. I'm in a very fortunate position. I've got a structure around me that allows me to make big things, but I am ultimately, it's Chris and me make the decisions for us.
Yeah.
We don't have anybody else making decisions. We have advisors, sure. But at the end of the day, if we want to do something a bit crazy because it sounds like fun, then we'll agree that we do that.
Yeah.
And then it's our fault, successful or not.
When it's your own money as well, you're perhaps a little bit more, you might go, I'm going to make a game set in the Lake District. You're like, yeah, but let's do that in a responsible way.
Well, there is that, yeah. But I think generally I've been the sort of person that controls budgets, doesn't want to overspend. I find you've got to spend the right amount.
Yeah.
That does sometimes mean you've got to spend more than you originally intended, and you've got to spend more time to make something work. But I don't think you should have a laissez-faire attitude to it. I don't think it should just be, hey, whatever, we'll just spend more time and money for no good reason. You have to have a good reason to spend money.
I'm conscious of the time, Jace. But I'll ask one final question. It's quite a general one. What's next then for Rebellion? We talked about what might happen if someone comes in and talks to you, but what is actually on your plan?
Keeping on making games. We're moving from a cross-generation technology, where Atomfall was on 7 different formats, which is difficult. The older formats are no longer financially viable. So we're all moving to the new formats. There's new forms of hardware coming up. There seems to be quite a significant rise in the sort of handheld format, which is intriguing. And the way people play games on kind of smaller, more personal screens, which is weird because also there's a rise in the enormous screen as well. So it's like we've got these two extremes. Nobody's playing on a mid-sized screen anymore. They're either on a little screen or an effing massive screen. How do your user interfaces cope with that? Yes. We're obviously keeping on updating our technology, move that forward, working with hardware manufacturers in all sorts of different ways. So that's exciting. There's one of the uniquenesses of the company is it's our own tech. Yeah. We make everything. So as a result of it being our own tech, we get approached by hardware manufacturers at the same sort of time that Epic or Unity do, because they want us to be supporting their hardware too. So in a way, it's a little bit of a competitive advantage for us. If we were just using somebody else's engine, we wouldn't get to know some of the hardware future potential. Because a lot of it, some of it doesn't actually ever come out. Some of it comes out in a totally different form. So that's always interesting. And then trying to grapple with discovery. How do we get our games to be seen and played by more people? So we acquired a company called Blackshaw, who are a kind of a YouTube agency, management agency. Mm-hmm. They're very interesting. They deal with influencers and they help people. People come to them and say, we want this big advertising campaign across multiple different influencers, and they will handle all of that. And we felt that was something we needed to look into. We're talking to various streamers about linear content, about TV shows and movies, none of which are anywhere near being announced, but it's always interesting to see what happens there. And that's an interesting industry because that's in turmoil at the moment and churning. So basically we want to make more good games. We'll continue to make more good games. We've now got the challenge of massive new success in Atomfall. What do we do in the future with Atomfall? Well, we've got DLC coming up. We're talking about what do we do about sequels? Do we do spin-offs? We've got more Sniper Elite we want to do. There's all of our brands. We want to try and keep a balance between sequels and new original things as well. And how do you do that when you've got now 3, if not 4 IPs? Yeah. We don't have the space in the studio with over 500 members of staff. So how do we cope with that? So lots of challenges, lots of excitement. At the end of the day, we want to make good content that entertains people. And that keeps them coming back for more, because if somebody buys one of our games or watches one of our videos, I want them to go, that was worthwhile. I wonder what else they've got in their library that I can also play. Because that means you've kept them happy.
Yeah. And you definitely have a style to your games. Well, I'm very conscious of the time. I think that is definitely all we have time for. But so thank you, Jason, for joining us.
My pleasure.
That's it for today's Game Business Show. To make sure you don't miss an episode or a big news story, visit www.thegamebusiness.com or just thegamebusiness.com. I hope it's www in front of things anymore. Stick in your email there and you'll get an email every time we put out a new episode or break a story. Until next time, thank you for tuning in. What is the first thing you do when you go to work in the morning?
Check my emails.
Console or PC?
PC.
Greatest movie of all time?
Difficult one. Conan the Barbarian.
If you could lead any other video games company, what would it be?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. My goodness. I don't think I'd be any good at running anybody else's. They're too different. I'll stick with Rebellion.
Will Nintendo Switch 2 outsell Switch 1?
Probably, yes.
What one thing should game companies be thinking about that probably aren't?
What matters to the player? Why should the player play their game, and why does the game make a difference to that player?